Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Diablo 2 Resurrected Question and Answers. This one in particular is done by PCGamesN.com. This one will be linked in the description for you guys and gals if you want to check it out for yourself. But I'm going to actually read this and talk about the answers. So, first off, we have a little opening statement here by PC Games, and let's go ahead and start with that. We've seen plenty of Blizzard's upcoming Diablo 2 remaster over the past week. The recent technical alpha gave us a chance to spend some proper hands-on time with Diablo 2 Resurrected, revealing a handful of key differences between it and the original Diablo 2. And it's clear the community has been just as hungrily digging through the first couple chapters, with some players managing to access locked classes and even uncovering an item duping glitch. We last spoke to Blizzard about Diablo 2 shortly after the remaster's reveal at BlizzCon 2021, where we largely touched on the team's plan for tackling this passion project, as well as references to marquee Mark Wahlberg and features like mod support. With the technical alpha at the end and plenty of playing time under our belts, we caught up with design lead Rob Gallerani and lead artist Chris Amaral. So read on for chat about monster redesigns, digging through reference materials, feedback on the technical alpha, and the importance of getting every detail right for fans of the original. PC Game N. So this is the start of the question and answer. So whenever it's Rob Gallerani, I'll just say RG, and whenever it's Chris Amaral, I'll say CA. Could you tell us more about Vicarious Vision's involvement with Diablo 2 Resurrected? RG. One of the really cool things about Vicarious Visions is the variety of games we've worked on. So Tony and Crash were the last couple, but before those we worked on many different genres. You've got first-person shooters, we've done racing games in the past. What's really important is doing right by each fan base. So what worked for Crash Bandicoot is not going to work for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and what worked for that is not going to work for Diablo 2. The basis of it is that we're making this game for the fans. This is an authentic remaster of people's childhood, and that's true of any kind of remaster you want to do. But I wouldn't say that's new to Blizzard, right? Blizzard has massive amounts of expertise as well. How did you go about updating the monster designs for HD? I love the way the Gargantuan Beast looks in Resurrected, but I'm less keen on the Fallen. Chris Amaral. All the art in the game was given what we call a 70-30 visual guide. It's a way to maintain the iconic shapes and the things that make Diablo 2 special. So 70% is keeping everything classic, maintaining the silhouette, reads, the colors, the posing, and all the stuff that makes the creature true to the original design. The 30% is where we've pushed and elevated that art. With the Gargantuan Beast in particular, we actually found a whole breadth of original reference images and renders of high-res sprites that were used internally. So we could really delve in and see what the inspiration was, and going from there, we would just try and bring a more modern, contemporary look to the art. So the Gargantuan Beast is this hulking, massive character. He's covered in fur, so we had to investigate and put a lot of effort into making a hair shader so it looks like fur. And then, as far as everything else is concerned, we wanted to make sure the reads are the same, the colors are the same. That was really our focus. We want things to feel like they're an evolved form of the original game, but still within the same realm. Bringing in those extra details and design elements helps to make everything feel more immersive, believable, and horrific. We want this game to feel like it's an M-rated game, and that it has that horror element like the original did. You recently had the first technical closed alpha. How did that go? RG. It went pretty awesome. The fans were really excited, and we've got a lot of great feedback. One of the most important things that you're only going to get from people when they play it is whether it feels right. So we could give all these interviews, we could say as much as we want, but there's only so much belief people have until they get it in their hands. It was awesome to actually take people who stream the original Diablo 2 all day and see them literally switch over to the new game and not miss a beat. That was really, really valuable feedback. The other really great thing was that we got a lot of very specific low-level feedback. It wasn't like there was one giant problem that kind of got in the way and overshadowed all those other things. It was little details like the color of a certain object or some other little thing. And that's great feedback to get. It didn't take long for players to crack item duping and swap to locked classes. Did any of that surprise you? RG. I mean, it's the internet, right? Can any of us really be surprised about that? Just one thing to remind everyone is that the game is a work in progress, right? Everything is still being worked on. There's a reason why we chose to show what we showed. When you look at the classes that were available, the Sorceress is a very ranged character with lots of effects. The Barbarian offers very close melee combat, and the Amazon's kind of an in-between. We wanted to hammer on the controller and how the controller felt for people, and those were the three classes that were ready to be shown and that we felt could get us the most feedback. It's not the greatest that players unlock those other classes, but we're not trying to hide anything. I think the statute of limitations is up on what Diablo 2 classes are. You know, he's basically saying, you know, hey, everyone knows what the other classes are and what they do. They were just excited to see what the changes were. And then we have CA answering next. In terms of the art side, I feel like Act 1 and Act 2 offered a really good vertical slice of gameplay. If you have a good boss fight and a really good breadth of atmospheres like deserts and wilderness, getting that feedback helps us, because I want to let you know that the art team is always reading everything online. All of us are constantly refreshing pages and looking around for feedback because we want to make this the best possible game that we can. It's something that really influenced the entire team. It influenced me personally because Diablo 2 made me want to become a dark fantasy artist. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and back in school I wanted to be something else. So this game really inspired me, and I want fans to know thank you for the feedback. We're reading it. That's very interesting. One of the things I tried to do immediately was access the secret cow level. Are the cows coming, and how are they going to look? Both of them replied, there is no secret cow level. Which they asked, are you sure? And RG said, you're taking the audio from this interview, correct? Not our facial expressions? Going back to that issue of item duping, does history help you stay ahead of that, or is it always going to be an issue? RG responds, like all live games, it's something that's going to have to be an active thing that we always work on. The technical alpha was an offline, local character experience. We had it connected to Battlenet, but that's really just because of the nature of the technical alpha. When your character is saved offline, there's a lot that players can do to that save. Right now, we're focusing most of our efforts on the Battlenet saved characters and preventing duping there because it ruins the economy for lots of players. There are no soulbound items, there is no personal loot, and on top of that, unfortunately, a common way that people dupe items is by crashing servers, so we want to make the best experience for all players. Having a history of 20 years of watching how people dupe items is definitely helpful, but it's something that has to be actively monitored. Very, very interesting there. There is no soulbound items. There is no personal loot. That's two questions that have been going around the internet about Diablo 2 Resurrected for a long time. How many people took part in the alpha test, and are you hoping to expand on that number in the next test? RG. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but I do know that it was easily tens of thousands of players. I can't say exactly how it was spread out because most of it was a lottery, right? However, we did try to make sure that we got a nice spread of people from different regions and that we had streamers getting into it. Mostly because then they can reach other players. So if you didn't get into the alpha, at least you can watch someone play it. We are hoping to increase that number come the beta, especially because the beta is multiplayer. What's your worst case scenario for any future tests regarding the feedback? RG. Worst case scenario, everything crashes and burns, but I think that we're pretty well prepared for that. I mean, we have a huge veterancy of Blizzard making online games that support millions and millions of active players, so there are groups of people who tell us what to prepare for. So yes, there's always a doomsday scenario. I don't think I'm educated enough to know how bad it could get. He kind of corrects his question here. I suppose the main reason I ask that is because of the backlash to Warcraft 3 Reforged. So I'm just wondering, what steps are you taking in order to ensure that that sort of thing doesn't happen with Diablo 2 Resurrected? RG responds, right now, we just have to get Diablo 2 right. What we're doing right now is having fans see it before it comes out. So by having the technical alpha, people get their hands on the game, and so we get feedback when there's still time to work on the game. It's really the best thing we have to hedge that. One thing I noticed while playing the alpha is that the stash seems like it's loosely based on the pluggy mod for Diablo 2. How much inspiration has been taken from mods that came out for the original Diablo 2? RG. When we approached the quality of life on this game, we definitely wanted to make the game more accessible, but not easier. So things like making the inventory huge or making it so all of your items can stack, right? Picking which loot to take and discard is still an important decision. So we're not going to make the game easier. Another thing is that looking at the mod community, it is a nice kind of litmus test to know, oh, this audience, the hardcore audience, they like these types of things. We didn't just say, oh, take everything that this mod has or do everything that this mod does. It was more about whether the community would hate this quality of life change or not. So it was nice to look at the community and see, oh, well, actually 90% of the mods out there do this one thing. Now, here's kind of a fun story for why we chose the size we did for the stash. Because you can toggle at any point between the high definition client and the original game, we have to make sure that the shared stash is accessible in the original game. Well, the 10x10 is actually the vendor screen grid, so we knew we already had art for that in the original game. So that's why we went with that number. It was bigger. It was art that already existed in the original client. Anything we add in HD as a quality of life change that didn't exist in the original client still has to work. There was no shared stash in the original client 20 years ago. It's the same with controller support, right? So if you switch to controller, you'll notice that the HUD stays in HD, but the game goes to SD. And that's because there was no controller support in the original game at all. And to try and fake that was like, nope, I don't think people will like that because there was no parody of what controller icons look like in the original game. Are there any other examples of mod-inspired changes that are coming to Resurrected? And is there going to be any acknowledgement of those original mod creators? Or is this just stuff that's coming to the game? It's not that we're looking at mods to tell us what we should do. It's that the ARPG genre has been advancing for 20 years, right? We have the people who work on Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 right next door to us. So it's just kind of looking at how the genre has matured and how those players are used to playing the game. We want to bring some of those changes to Diablo 2 Resurrected, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't make it not Diablo 2. We're trying to fix Diablo 2. We're not trying to make Diablo 2 a different game. We have other games if you want that. Take AutoGold, for example. AutoGold is something that many games just do now. But if you look at how we put AutoGold in Diablo 2 Resurrected, you still have to run over to it. We don't make it like a giant vacuum. There's still this physical aspect of having to run around directly, to the golds to pick it up. When we added controller support, we initially thought to just make the inventory into a list because moving items around Tetris style is hard on a controller. But when we did that, it was totally usable. But it wasn't Diablo 2 anymore. And that's really kind of the process we go through for what quality of life changes we want to make. Do people expect it? Like even item compare. A lot of people didn't even remember that item compare wasn't in the original game. That's news to me. RG. It's just become such a staple, and so that's where it's okay, because people forgot it didn't even exist in the old game. I was really impressed with how Resurrected handles the map. I remember having to toggle it on and off constantly in the original because it just got in the way so much. CA responds, a little art detail on the map is that the map art is actually pulling from all the sprite art from the original game. So we're using the original sprite art to create that map. So it's kind of cool, a cool nod to the original game. Presumably, the hope is that Resurrected will draw in a lot of new players as well. How do you go about making a game that's 20 years old appealing to a new audience? RG responds. We definitely want to focus on the authenticity of it, this notion of playing it because it's a piece of history. We want people to understand that when they're going into it. We want people to understand that when they are going into it. The other part is this day and age, anytime we instruct a player on how to do something, we're actually taking away from what the community coming together to talk to each other. And it's so much easier to learn and share now with forums, YouTubers, and streamers, so that's something we don't want to squash. That being said, one of the biggest things we're focusing on is discoverability. For example, a lot of people were like, oh, I wish you could automatically sort your belt when using the controller. And we're like, you can. It says so right at the bottom of the screen. But clearly we didn't do it well enough to let players know. So those are things where it's not making the game easier, it's not changing the vibe of the game, but we want people to kind of stumble upon this stuff without having to go to the internet to figure it out. Last time we spoke, you mentioned finding reference images of Mark Wahlberg for Larzik. Did you find any other quirky references? CA. Not so much wacky or quirky. I mean, we did a lot of digging and we found areas where the original game would pull certain pieces of art. I think I gave an example of the succubus, which was actually just a re-envision of the assassin. They made the assassin first, took her model file, gave her wings, gave her slightly different armor. So any time where we saw there was a choice made for the original game, we made the same choice for Resurrected, just to really stay true to the decisions that were made originally. RG. This even extends to gear and stuff. You can tell that over 20 years ago, someone went to the library for a historic reference of a Roman shield, and we now have the ability to find the exact same historical pieces in the Louvre or the Smithsonian. It's not just remastering what was made, it's also how they made it back then. Yeah, and it's also about, this is CA, yeah, and it's also about matching their intention. It's something that was red. Were they trying to give it a bloody visual effect, or did it just have a tint of red? Diablo 2 Resurrected is set to release at some point in 2021, hopefully appeasing ARPG fans as they wait for news on Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2. That's the end of the article. You know, interestingly enough, I'm going to make a prediction here, and you guys can quote me on this. I think it'll be fun. Diablo 2 Resurrected is going to come out June 29th on the 20th anniversary of Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction expansion set. That is my prediction. And if you guys want to make your predictions down in the comments, go right ahead. I will be happy to take a look at them. And you know what? If one of you guys gets close enough, if I feel like you really kind of hit the nail on the head, maybe I'll give you a prize. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about this real quick. I'm going to go over the various things that were said that I felt were kind of important, and you know, we'll look at it from that aspect. So the Gargantuan Beast. Let's start with the Gargantuan Beast. I kind of thought the Gargantuan Beast was weird looking, but according to this, the Gargantuan Beast is based off of, as he put it, original reference images and renders of the high-res sprites that were used internally. So I can't really say that the Gargantuan Beast is wrong then, because if the Gargantuan Beast is based off of those high-res sprites and stuff, then more power to it. I say leave it as it is then. I don't understand why the Gargantuan Beast has to show off his abs and his pecs. He didn't do that in the original. He was just one big furry monster. I don't know. He's talking about the closed technical alpha, and you know, he says that tens of thousands of people were gotten to the alpha, but then he also says at the same time that it was spread out over multiple countries. So, when I was watching the streams, I saw people in Russia, I saw people in France, I saw people in, in Canada, in Mexico, in Spain, I think I even saw one guy who was in Japan. So, they really kind of spread it out. So I guess that kind of makes sense why it felt like there wasn't that many people. Because if you spread out tens of thousands over multiple countries, it's not going to be a lot. He goes over the duping again, and he pretty much says what I said in the last Q&A, because I did another one of these that was from a Korean news agency. And he basically says the same thing. We're focused on the Battlenet. We're not focused on the single player. There was a single player client, and there were single player characters, and pretty much what he's saying is that any duping that took place on the single player side of things is not important. He does go over the classes, though, and I thought that was very interesting, his comment. He said, it's not the greatest that players unlocked those other classes, but we're not trying to hide anything. I think the statute of limitations is up on what Diablo 2 classes are. And he also kind of says that those classes that they chose to show were ones that were finished. So I think we've got confirmation here on two things. Number one, that the classes that were not shown are not finished, which is a good confirmation because some of them do look kind of silly, like the Paladin's Holy Shield, for instance. And then on top of that, he's also saying that it's not such a big deal because it's not like people haven't known what those classes are and the skills that they have for the past 20 years. The only thing that anyone is really looking at is the graphics upgrade. What else do we have here? We have confirmation of the secret cow level, of course, which we already knew about. What's also kind of interesting here is he talks about like how they've had 20 years, of information, about the cheating and the duping and the various ways that this game deals with them. So I mean, I guess you could say that they're very well informed when it comes to that. CA Chris Amaral made a very interesting comment about he said, all of us are constantly refreshing pages and looking around for feedback because we want to make sure this is the best possible game that we can make. And I think that's a very interesting comment because I like it. I love it when developers are constantly looking at the feedback that's being posted on the internet, and it makes me feel good because sometimes when you're online and maybe you're arguing with some guy about like how the Amazon's face looks like a 90-year-old grandma, you sometimes feel like, hey, maybe this is pointless. Maybe arguing with this guy is absolutely pointless. But if the developers are constantly surfing, forums and Facebook pages and like Reddit pages and YouTube streams and live streams and stuff like that, and they're looking at the feedback, then it's not pointless. And voicing your opinion in these places is important. So very interesting comment there. I actually do remember back when Lord of the Rings Online was coming out, there was actually a forums, and the forums had the developers in it, and the forums was actually shut down once the game started production, but you could talk with the original developers of Lord of the Rings Online, and I believe that quite a bit of what we talked about in those forums actually made it into the game, and I like it. What else do we have here? We got a lot of very interesting things. Very, very interesting. There's this comment by Rob Gallerani where he says, when your character is saved offline, there's a lot of things that you can do to that character. Right now, we're focusing most of our efforts on Battlenet, of course. And then he goes on to say, preventing duping because it ruins the economy. And he also says there is no soulbound items. So soulbound is an item that is bound to your character and cannot be traded. There is no personal loot. So right now in Diablo 2 Resurrected, there is... Diablo 2, sorry. And right now in Diablo 2, there is a global loot system. So when something drops on the ground, everybody has a chance to pick it up. And you can trade that item back and forth. So even if you pick something up, it doesn't get bound to you. You can then trade it back to somebody else or drop it back on the ground and let somebody else pick it up. That is the global loot system. And a lot of people have been clamoring about how the global loot system is bad. But honestly, I think the global loot system is tied intrinsically into everything that Diablo 2 was, into the community, into every interaction. And changing it to a personal loot system, I think, would have been a devastating mistake. And here we have a comment from Rob Gallerani, basically saying, in a nutshell, there is no personal loot system. So very, very interesting there. I think we have confirmation now that personal loot is not coming to Diablo 2. We also have some very interesting things here about the next phase of the beta or alpha, or beta as he puts it. Rob makes this comment. He says, so if you didn't get into the alpha, at least you can watch someone play it. We are hoping to increase that number come the beta, especially because the beta will be multiplayer. So there's kind of an interesting thing here. We haven't had the multiplayer part of the alpha yet. There was supposed to be a multiplayer stress test. And when you go onto the Battlenet website for Diablo 2 and you go to opt in, instead of saying alpha, it says beta now. So perhaps the second phase of the alpha stress test, has been converted to a beta because they are much further along than they ever expected. Very interesting. But at least we do have confirmation that when the beta does come out, it's going to be multiplayer. We also have a very odd kind of question here where he kind of dodges it. You know, he says, what's your worst case scenario for any future tests? And Rob kind of dodges it, and then he kind of refines the question and asks it again. And honestly, he still kind of dodges it. But he does say this very interesting comment. He says, what we're doing right now is having fans see it before it comes out. So by having the technical alpha, people get it in their hands, have their hands on the game, so we get feedback when there's still time to work on the game. So he is very dedicated to making sure that we get a good product out. So I like that. The talk about the mods is interesting. I really actually was quite interested in this part about the HD to SD switching. So he's talking about how he wants to make sure that when the game is switching from HD to SD, or from high definition to the old client, and from the old client back to the high definition, that everything is still compatible. And I think that's very interesting. He's basically saying that they used the 10x10 stash, which is the same size as the vendor screen, because the vendor screen art already existed. So that's a very interesting thing there, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep the original, like, old school client, with all the original old art. They could make new art, but they don't want to make new art if they don't have to. So it almost seems like that if there was a larger art size than 10x10, they might have even made the stash larger than 10x10. But who knows? That's an interesting thing that I think is going to have a big effect on what they add and how they add it. Because if they can't represent that in the 2D client, it becomes an issue, right? Because they're basically saying here that the controller support became that, because there's this whole HUD and everything for the controller support, and that when you switch to the 2D client while using a controller, it still maintains the high definition HUD for the controller, because there is no SD counterpart. You know what I mean? And then we have some other interesting information here about, like, AutoGold. He said that he specifically did not make AutoGold like the new games, where it, like, sucks everything in like a freaking vacuum. He made AutoGold so you have to kind of walk over the gold to get it to pick up. If you're standing near the gold, that's not good enough. You got to kind of walk over the gold, which I like. So you still have to physically move over there. What else does he have here? He talks about how he tried to do, like, some new things with the controller support and how they worked, but they weren't Diablo 2. And I think that's very interesting, because what that shows is that they're trying very much to maintain the core of what Diablo 2 is. And so they're not going to add anything to Diablo 2 which ruins that Diablo 2 feel. So that's very interesting as well. And then there's this final comment, well, not final comment, but there's this comment down here by RG where he says, we definitely want to focus on the authenticity of it. This notion of playing it because it's a piece of history. We want people to understand that when they are going in. And I think this is a very poignant comment. And the reason why is because this comment shows that RG is trying to treat Diablo 2 as if it were an antique. So if you are a antique restoration person, you go and you find maybe like some 500-year-old Elizabethan, curio cabinet or something, and it has these beautiful accents and all this beautiful inlay and all this other stuff, and you want to restore it back to its original form, you don't go lopping off legs and making new ones. You don't go chopping off pieces of wood and making new ones. You restore what is there. You bring out the original, inlay. You find a way to use the original wood, even if it's beat up and broken, and if you have to make a new piece, if you're forced to create something new to restore this object, you do it in such a way that is in line with how the original was made. And he has basically revealed, I think, the most important information that any of us will ever get on Diablo 2 Resurrected. Rob Gallerani is treating this game as if it is an antique. He's restoring it like it's a museum piece, and he wants to put it in the museum, and he wants little children and stuff to come in and go, "Oh, look, Mommy, there's Diablo 2. Diablo 2 is such an amazing game." And they don't want little kids to come in and be like, "Oh, look, there's Diablo 2, and it's got like neon lights on it flashing, and there's like spikes sticking out of it that were never there before, and it like walks around and has like little technobot arms and stuff." He wants people to see the original thing as it was, and I think that's the most important piece of information we've gotten so far. He also has some other information here. We've already gotten the information on the assassin model. That was actually one of the previous things, but that's interesting to know, that the assassin model is the same model that they used for the succubus. Then he also says, he's talking about how they went to museums and they actually studied pieces of armor, like the Roman shield, for instance. And, he's saying that they kind of want to maintain that. And CA even chimes in, and he says, we're trying to match the intention, and this goes back to the antique restoration bit. They're trying to match, what the original developers had in mind when they made this game. They're treating it as if they have absolutely no clue what's going on, and they're trying to explore, what was on their minds when they originally did this, which is very interesting. And a very good Q&A, very, very large amount of information here. I think we've just about covered everything, though. So June 29th, guys. I think that's when it's coming out. June 29th, the anniversary of Diablo 2 Resurrected, or Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction expansion set. That's probably when the game's going to release. That's my prediction, and if I'm correct, y'all can hail me as a savior. And, if I'm incorrect, feel free to laugh at me. That's fine, too. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Diablo 2 Resurrected Q&As. And thanks for watching, and keep watching.
He's a little booty, like, that's a cute little booty.